Hello, after yesterday's video about resawing wood, I had several folks message me or comment asking specific questions about setting up my saw and just tips in general for resawing, so I thought I'd share a little bit with you. I'll show some specifics, but a lot of the basics are just normal blade saw or bandsaw setup. So I'll talk about that, but I'm not going to go into super detail because there's plenty of other info out there about how to set up your bandsaw properly. I know what works for me, and I know where some traps are, so I'll try to share. So to begin with, before you resaw a piece of wood, you have to have jointed an edge and a face. It has to be square and flat so that you're running through against the fence and the table, that it stays put. If it's going to wobble or anything, that's not going to help. And you may need to, after a few slices, go back to the joiner and get another good face. You'll lose some wood, but you might save the last few slices from being squirrely if you get nice and flat. Also, every bandsaw's table to blade relationship is different. I don't know how yours table adjusts on its trunnions, but you have to get the table and both axes square to the blade. And you're going to have to figure that out for your specific table. And once you've got the table squared to the blade, you have to get the fence squared to the table and the blade. And each kind of fence is going to be different. I'll show how mine works in a minute. And I will also talk about blade drift in a moment. You want the highest tension you can get and still run the saw properly. Too much tension, of course, will mess up the tracking or bog down the saw. So you want to be able to tighten your top tension wheel as much as you can. And a lot of older machines might need a replacement spring in the top, especially a lot of the old 14-inch Delta bandsaws. There's an aftermarket spring that's much stronger. If your spring is bottomed out and you still don't feel like you have enough tension, then you need to figure that out, get a replacement spring. I'll come over and show the tension in a moment here. I use blades that have a tooth count between like 3 and 4 teeth per inch. Any finer and it can clog up pretty easily. And I use Timberwolf blades, they're my favorite. And I think that this one might even be a skip tooth blade where it's goes back and forth between 3 and 4 teeth per inch. I use a blade width right now of about a 1/2 inch. Some people will say that you need to have the deepest blade possible up to 1 inch to do proper resawing, and that might be true, but your saw might not be happy and healthy running such a thick blade. I've done tons of great resaw work with just a 3/8 inch Timberwolf blade. It's less money and it's easier to run. I only have a 3 horsepower machine, so I tried running 1 and 3/4 inch blades and it didn't really do any better. The 3/8 inch or 1/2 inch blade is good enough for me. Okay, so now tracking on your saw. I have seen multiple famous YouTube people running bandsaws where their blade is like up on the front end of the wheel, and every time they push on the machine, the blade goes back into the guides and then back out again, which is dangerous and it makes for an inaccurate cut. And a lot of people say, well, you've got to get the blade in the center of the wheel. And that's true, but what you want to get in the center of the wheel is actually the gullet of the blade. So here's the teeth of the blade. The gullet is the cutout piece there between the teeth. You want that to be in the center of the wheel. It's a little hard to see because of the guard on here. But a lot of people center the whole blade on the wheel, but that's not what you want. You want the gullet on the center of the crown of the tire. If you can do that and then set your guides so that the blade doesn't move much, you're going to have a more accurate cut with a lot less waviness. As far as setting your guides go, I have very little movement in between here, like maybe a piece of paper, and going back is about a little bit more here into the thrust bearing, just a little bit. I don't know why people have their guides set so that the blade goes in and out and left and right so much. It just seems silly. I'm not a real big fan of these Carter guides. They're what came on the saw, and I haven't figured out how to upgrade yet. But that tracking is important. If your blade is not running on the wheels right, it's not going to help. So now there's a thing called drift, and that's where that's where when you try to cut a straight line with your on a piece of wood, maybe the angle that your blade is going is actually off to the left or off to the right. There are some people will tell you how to get that out. What I do though is I just set my fence to that angle. So the trick is you take a long piece of plywood, you draw a straight line on it, you run it through the saw on the line, and you get almost done, and then you stop the saw. and whatever angle the board is sitting on your table, that's the drift you need to compensate for. So I set my fence to that angle and I go for it. I have this Craig fence on here, which I think is just made for a little Delta 14 saw. It's not my favorite. It's doing okay. I had to do some kind of backyard hillbilly work to make it fit on here, and it's not my favorite situation. I would like to have a Bismeyer style fence on here, but at least with this fence, I can adjust this angle. I can adjust this angle. I can also there's little set screws all around the base here to adjust it. It locks down pretty tight, and then you can account for the blade drift easily there. I don't really use the measurement on there, the measurement tape that it came with, and it does mount to the front of my machine with quite a bit of adjustment. So, and then I have this magnetic feather board that locks down, that I set down next to here, so that when I'm feeding wood in, these little plastic fingers are pushing very hard on the side to keep it against the fence. I don't like using a tall fence with this one. It doesn't work very well for me. So that's pretty much my setup. Carter guides, Timberwolf, 1/2-inch blade, 3 to 4 teeth per inch. The Craig fence, magnetic featherboard. This machine has 3 horsepower motor, although obviously I've done a lot of great work on a little Delta too. And then my last tip is just to go slow. You don't worry about forcing it. Where things tend to go wrong with resawing is everything gets too hot. It's going to get hot if your blade's dull, if your guides aren't set right, if you're trying to go too fast. For many reasons, there's lots of reasons it can get too hot. If it goes too hot, the blade expands, it starts to wobble, the guides don't work right. So that's what you got to watch out for. Okay, resawing tips, there you go.